All right. Hey, welcome back to another Ask Me Anything. I do this every week on Tuesdays, starting at 12 o'clock Pacific. So 3 o'clock on the East Coast. Just checking my phone to see if we are on LinkedIn and living live. We are. Awesome. So this week, I usually start things off while people are sort of jumping on and getting situated, talking a little bit about anything that I see sort of like come up or issues that I see during the week. So I definitely have one that I'll cover. And then this works really well, at least for me. It's far more entertaining when people like leave comments and suggestions and things. So if you're out there and you're watching and you can actually see this, if you could just drop a comment and just let me know that I am alive across Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Periscope, and Twitch. Hello there, Samita. So good to see you. So I think we are live, definitely on those platforms. And again, just shoot me some questions. So the whole purpose of this is for me to try and get back a little bit and answer questions for people that are looking to transition into technology, looking to get first job in software engineering. And my day job is I have a software apprenticeship, so San Diego Code School. We basically help people. We pay them to learn how to code and then get a year of experience under their belt. We don't charge our students, nor do we charge employers. Instead, we get projects that are placed with us, and we charge for delivering quality software. So it's a nice little ecosystem of building quality software to do that, but also helping other people. So that said, this week, one of the things I wanted to kind of touch on was sort of the struggle is real, not just for junior engineers, but also for people that are a little bit more senior. And there was definitely somebody that was a little bit more seasoned, and he was interviewing for a position. He posted sort of a debrief afterwards on LinkedIn, and it was sort of surrounding this idea that the interviewer, the recruiter, internal recruiter, asked him how he would rate his, I think it was Java skills on a scale of like 1 to 10. And so he responded 7, to which the recruiter said, "We only hire 10 out of 10s. And his response to that was, that's not right. And here's why I think that's flawed. And I wouldn't rate myself as this. And I don't think it's a good idea for you to ask that question. That's not a really great question." And so when I read that on LinkedIn, I was like, wow, man, like what a moment. And so I think the advice that I did share with him, and I wanted to share with everybody else, is to really think about when you're in the interview, one of the techniques that I think is most helpful is to really think about not so much the question that the person has asked, but why they are asking that question. And so to me, it seemed really interesting because I ask a similar question to this during most of my technical interviews. I ask it in a slightly different way, and I'll give you that so you get more context. I typically will ask someone, because I'm usually hiring for JavaScript positions, right? Full stack JavaScript or some front end position. And I'll say, how would you rate your JavaScript skills? Notice I didn't give a scale. And so oftentimes someone will respond back, well, do you mean like on a number scale, like 1 through 10, or, and then they'll leave it up to me. And so it's interesting when they say that. I'm kind of ambivalent, and I'll just say, sure, right? Because I'm not trying to give them a lot of context. I'm actually trying to see how do they internalize the question I'm asking, and how do they rate themselves. So I think a superior answer is actually to not ask the question, because I haven't given you the like score, right? The 0 to 10. I don't use that as my question prompt. Instead, I like it when people say something like, I would consider myself, I'm pretty competent, or I'm pretty confident in my skills in the front end. And so I think I'm strongest with JavaScript with these libraries or these frameworks, right? Or they say, well, I've been writing JavaScript code for X amount of time, and I feel like I have a good knowledge of the principles, and if I need to, I can write some pretty good vanilla JavaScript, and I'm also a fan of React, right? That helps me to now have a very nuanced conversation, and I can kind of like start peeling back the layers of the onion and understand a little bit more about this person's background, what they're interested in. And that's a far more interesting conversation than when someone says, I'm an 8 out of 10, which does answer the question. But then I have to sort of like, okay, so now I can calibrate the rest of my questions during the interview towards someone who believes that they are an 8 out of 10. So now I'm trying to just develop sort of a good sense of, is this person accurate in their self-assessment? Are they overconfident and their skill level doesn't match that? Is that a good match for their current skill set? That's all I'm trying to figure out when I'm asking those questions. So you should always think about the questions that the interviewer is asking in the context of what are they really trying to find out. There, in many cases, when they ask you that, like, rate your skill question, where do you internalize your skill level to be at? And oftentimes newer developers have a little bit of maybe imposter syndrome and are usually not willing to overstate their background. So if someone does overstate their background and they're like, I'm a 10 out of 10, that will usually cause me to ask some really tough questions to see, are they willing to validate that with, answering some difficult or challenging scenario questions. So it's probably not a great idea if someone asks you explicitly to rate yourself on a scale of 10 to say 10. And so that brings up the second part, which was this person that had been in this interview was offended for a few reasons. The first reason was he felt like this was not a fair question to ask. And the second was he got ghosted. So I'll cover the ghosted part separately. We'll deal with that towards the end. But for the first part, feeling like it wasn't an appropriate question, I disagree. I think it's a very valid question to ask someone to assess where they currently, their skill level is. When they responded, we only hired 10 out of 10s, that's where you have to reset. That's where you have to kind of call an audible in the field, and you have to be able to now respond to someone as being somewhat confrontational, right? And so you have to have the ability during the interview to identify, okay, the person has posed the question and they have done it intentionally in a somewhat confrontational manner, and they are looking to see what your response is. So the part that the person didn't get was, this was about sort of trying to figure out, is the person not just able to identify where they are, but able to handle a little bit of conflict in a positive and constructive way, right? So totally missed it, like went over his head. He got frustrated. It was like, this is not a fair question. What does this mean? And so it's like, you've got to be able to sort of step out of the moment when you're in an interview and really figure out every response you get back from the person. Okay, are they validating my response? Are they asking me for a feedback? Are they asking me to expand more on what I've just mentioned? And in this case, do not take the initial maybe confrontation that you might sense from them and like amp it up and be like, well, that's not a nice way of saying, I just told you I'm an 8. You said you only hire 10s, and so you're not right. And try and really at all costs avoid, just from a human being's perspective, being sort of like demeaning to them or their process. There could be a valid reason why they're asking this question that you don't know about. And so you seem pretty arrogant when you say that's not a fair question to ask, especially when it's entirely a fair question to ask. So that leads to the second part, which is that he blew the interview, because that's it, game over. Like anything you did after that, it would be very difficult for you to recover the interview. So just understand, sometimes you can goof during the interview, and that's it. Like you've got no shot of getting a job at that organization until they forget that you came in, or the person that was talking to you moves on somewhere else and there's a new regime. So what he also failed to understand is, if an organization is not going to make you an offer, they are most likely not going to be super communicative. And it should reason if you take the shoe off your foot and wear their shoe for a little while, which is if you have to not offer someone a job, and that's the case. If I have one job I'm looking for, it might have 100 applicants. That means I'm going to basically have 99 people that are not going to get the job. It's really important to understand that you have a responsibility to be communicative as an organization, to let the person know that they are not a fit for the job. But, big but here, but if you put your shoe, the other person, you wear their shoe for just a second, the first thing you're going to usually ask someone when they say, listen, we've decided to pass, we are not going to offer you an opportunity, the first question you usually have in your mind is, but why? Why didn't I get the job? Why didn't you hire me? and you put them in a situation that is extremely difficult, right? Because they do, in many cases, want to be constructive and give you good feedback, but there's really never going to be a response that you're going to be like, oh, cool, makes sense, later, thanks. It's always going to seem painful and always be difficult and somewhat hard to manage. So I'm not saying it's appropriate for recruiters to ghost people, but what I am saying is there should be an understanding, a level of understanding that it's a difficult conversation to have. And in many cases, you're never going to walk away satisfied. They shoot you an email and it's a default message that basically says, sorry, at this time, we've not selected you to move on. We thought you had a great interview, but we're just passing. That's not going to feel like satisfying. Like, oh man, they didn't tell me why. I need that information to get better. So don't focus on that. Try not to focus on things that you're not going to be able to control, number one, and also try not to internalize things that are just part of a really difficult scenario or situation. Sure, they should give you some blanket response that says, hey, your candidacy is over. We are no longer considering you for a role. However, you should not expect more. If you get more information, awesome. But in many cases, you're going to get a very generic, you didn't have the experience for this position. And that's a generic way of saying, I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to make it very vague because I don't want to get in trouble. So don't internalize that and think, oh, I need to get more experience. It could just be a catch-all bucket that they tell everyone when they deny you so they don't have to get in trouble. Because it could lead to very amped up confrontation, and it could lead with someone accusing the organization of being discriminatory. And, well, they told me they didn't hire me because I said X, Y, or Z, and that was discriminatory against me. So for that reason, most hiring managers are not going to give you very many details, and they will give you a blanket sort of generalization. We don't think you have the right experience. We don't think you're the right fit, etc. So try and separate the two. Try and separate the ending of that candidacy with what you think might be helpful, which is meaningful feedback on what you need to do next. So to solve that second part, what you need to do next, you're going to go back to your spreadsheet, which you should be keeping. You should be keeping track of how many jobs you apply to, who you're contacting, when you should reach out to them, when you should follow up with them. And on that sheet, the pattern should emerge. So I've seen people that say I've applied to 700 jobs in 6 months. That's a bad pattern. That's 100 jobs plus per month that you're applying to. You're not going to do quality reach outs and quality follow-ups if you're doing that many. So if you start doing that on your spreadsheet, if you have this huge long list, and I've seen students that I'm coaching through the job search process, and I've seen them have like lots and lots of jobs. And I'm like, whoa, you need to slow down. Take more time with each job. You're doing a lot of work here, and it's actually simpler than what you're doing. You're doing a ton more work than you actually need to do. So keep that in mind. It's not just feedback from the individual person interviewing you, because it may not be accurate. They may not be able to share with you the real secret sauce as to how you blew it. And, as in the case of that person, you basically became super confrontational in the middle of the interview, and that was not constructive. They're not going to say that. They're not going to say, well, in the middle of the interview, we had an interaction, and it demonstrated to me that you lack the capacity to handle constructive feedback in a positive way. They're not going to say that to you, right? Because then you could come back and you could sue them and be like, they didn't like my attitude and they discriminated against people. It's like, I don't need that problem. So you're probably not going to get that. So I'm going to open it up, take some questions. First question I have, and please feel free to drop some comments in the comment boxes on any of the platforms. If you drop a comment in there, I should see that as a question, and I'll be able to share it and then hopefully take a stab at answering it. So the first question I have is, how do you suggest going about receiving feedback in those cases? Would it help with improvement? So I think I've answered at least a portion of that, which is you should be looking more for not necessarily how do you think they thought your interview went. You should instead be really diagnosing where were the harder parts for you and what could you do better to prepare for those questions next time. That's about the best learning that I would say that you'll have out of most interviews is what did I feel like I was strong with? Where do I feel like I could improve the most? What do I need to do between now and the next opportunity I get to have another interview? And if you really just think about those, the other metrics about how many more reach outs and follow-ups and how many more applications do I need to do to get the next opportunity? Different metric. So if you just sort of isolate and sort of try and like, okay, we're going to just think about this component, which is the interview, you internally know parts that felt awkward, that felt tough, that felt like your response fell flat and it didn't resonate. You didn't get a good, like they weren't mirroring you, or they weren't nodding in approval when you're saying things. So you should be able to detect some of those signs are off. And if so, those are areas where you want to strengthen how you do your storytelling, how you articulate what your value add is, and how you articulate what your superpower is, how you articulate how you would make an impact for their business, and how you could directly add to their bottom line. Those are the kinds of things that are very situation specific, but you're never going to get them to answer that question. So why be frustrated that they're not going to give you that answer, right? It's much more about you sort of assessing what went well, how do you turn that up? Next interview, how do you spend more time focusing on the areas where you were seeing the head nodding and you were seeing like they were vibing with you and everything felt like was flowing pretty well. So hopefully that helps. Next question, Hector Cano. What's up, Hector? He says, I am making a mobile app using React Native for a company that should have a large number of users. What do you think about TypeScript and if I should use it in the app? So I think it shouldn't necessarily be the key factor isn't whether or not there's a large number of users. It's whether or not there's a large number of developers might be helpful. It also could be helpful for you over time. So for those of you that are not familiar, TypeScript is a way that you can use a subset of JavaScript that has additional strong typing so that you'll be able to sort of better read the code and get some better hinting. So the system behind the scenes will provide you some additional guardrails that might prevent simple errors and make it easier for teams in many cases to work collaboratively and not have to sort of like read between the lines, which JavaScript provides a lot of flexibility. And so sometimes it's hard to jump into a code base and really get a solid footing and understand how everything works because, again, JavaScript doesn't force you to have types. But if you use TypeScript, which is sort of like a dialect of JavaScript, then you would be able to get some of that additional information as you're reading code and reviewing code and adding new code and maintaining the code base that could make that process go faster and smoother. So I would say you should be thinking not about the number of end users, because that's not really where TypeScript makes the biggest impact. I would say it's more about, is it going to help other developers come on board faster and be able to add more features and make the application more maintainable, et cetera. And I'd say all of those things are super positive. So I think if you have the capacity to deliver the project and do it well in TypeScript, sure, that makes all the sense in the world to me. Now, again, you got to be familiar with TypeScript enough that it becomes doesn't become a hindrance for you to be able to deliver value to your end customers if you're doing this for a company. So do I think it can add a lot of value? Absolutely, especially for maintaining an application over time. Because obviously we know the first time you build something, you're going to get some feedback from the customers, and those users might ask you for features or add more value to the application. And that's when it really helps to have put a good job or put a good amount of planning in place and have architected and designed it well so that you can actually grow out the features and scale up the application. So hopefully that helps, Hector. A little free consulting advice about building applications, but you know, it's all right. It's Ask Me Anything, so I guess anything goes. Any other questions about landing a job in tech? And we could keep it interview specific, or if people are looking for like job search advice, more than happy to answer those questions as well. For those just joining, the way to get the questions to me is drop them in the chat box. If you drop something in the chat box, I will read it out and respond. Yeah, you can do it on any of the platforms. So another question. So this one's a little longer. So what do I recommend having on LinkedIn profile as a job title to best catch the eye of recruiters and companies? I'm currently a flight attendant, starting the process of applying for front-end positions. Pretty big career shift, I agree. I'm wondering if my LinkedIn should say freelance web developer, flight attendant, thanks. No. So I would say, unless you want to continue being a flight attendant, I'd say you could change it. So I would say right now, you are aspiring to be, it sounds like a professional software engineer. So I would put that in your profile and say, you're a software engineer, right? You're an early career software engineer. I'm not sure how long you've been doing it, but if you're currently a flight attendant and that's just sort of what you've done in the past, it'll be obvious when people look at the work history in your LinkedIn. So as they start looking at your previous work history, they'll see, oh, okay, you work for like maybe some airlines and you list a role. They'll be like, okay, cool, understand that. Really important to understand that there's a lot of folks that are transitioning into technology feel like they're going to be disadvantaged and people are going to be like, oh, well, you don't have any experience because you're a flight attendant. That's not the case. You have a lot of transferable skills, right? One of them is problem solving, right? So when you're up in the air and you only have a certain amount of finite resources at your hands, then you are going to get creative and you're going to be able to creatively solve problems. That's all we do in software. We're just creatively solving problems for businesses. We happen to do it in many cases by writing software, by making business recommendations. But at the end of the day, those attributes that you have from your other work history are things that you're bringing to the table. You also, my guess is, if you've been doing it for a while, are probably punctual, right? Because you got to make flights, so you got to get to where you need to be. You're probably flexible. There's all these other things that you could then use as transferable skills in software. So in terms of title, I would just say software engineer. If you're focusing on the front end, you might want to say front end software developer. Developer tends to be a term that people will use a little bit more with front end. Software engineer, people tend to use that more with like full stack or back end. So again, it's going to be market specific. Maybe in the specific market that you're looking to apply, they use one term over another. Use what's common in your marketplace, right? So like look at what other people are putting on their resume that are in that same domain. Go with what other people are doing, so it doesn't sort of like stick out as like, why did the person like write it that way, right? Like that's sort of weird. You want them to just get the vibe that you're like, oh, you're, at least from the resume portion, from the job title portion, you sort of fit into the mold of what they're looking for when they're looking for an early career software developer. You're not going to want to try and trick them into thinking like you're this seasoned person, right? Because that's not who you are, right? Unless you are a seasoned person. So you want them to know, hey, you're transitioning into this. This is your passion. This is what you want to. This is what you love to do. This is where you want to be. And I would be as upfront and transparent as possible. But like, these are the things that you're most interested in doing. That these are the passion projects that you're working on. This is where you trained, or this is how you trained to put yourself in a position to be ready for a job. So try and make your LinkedIn profile that narrative, that story. And you want to talk about what you're most interested in. Then anything that is a big sort of educational accomplishment. So let's say you have a bachelor's degree, but it's not in computer science. List your bachelor's degree. That shows that you've completed something and you have at least a bachelor's degree. Next, you want to list if you have any specific training in software engineering. So did you go to a coding boot camp? Did you go through free code camp online? What prepared you technically? And then maybe some projects and then your work history, and you're going to be good. You're going to use the About Us section on your LinkedIn to tell sort of the narrative that you would set up in a cover letter, right? So it should be very similar language that you'd use in a cover letter. This is why you're transitioning out of being a flight attendant and why you think your skills are better used in web development. Now, one last little piece I mentioned is you mentioned freelance. So if you're looking for freelance work, not super sure. It just depends. A lot of people have very specific ideas around that. So if I'm a hiring manager, I'm not necessarily looking for freelancers, because oftentimes freelance means that you are not interested in a regular position at an organization. And so like a lot of times that will just like immediately remove you from that pool of potential candidates if you use the word freelance, unless you really want a freelance position and you do not want a permanent role. So you got to decide which one that you're looking for, at least as far as your LinkedIn is concerned. If you're still up in the air, then you can play both sides, because then you can have a resume. You can submit one resume for like things that you think are more leaning towards freelance and independent consultant and contractor type work. And then you can use another resume that you send to organizations where the position is a full-time permanent position, right? So you'll have to decide that. But on your LinkedIn, you got to choose one. And so I would go with the one where you think it's the most interesting, where you'd really like to be, and use your LinkedIn for like the more long-term like career development stuff. So hopefully that helps. I think LinkedIn's a super valuable networking tool, and I think it's smart for you to be focused on that. Excuse me. I would just make sure that you're kind of careful with the word freelance. And it's just because, again, as a hiring manager, I want to know what someone's true intention is. Is it your true intention that you want to be like a digital nomad, you want to travel all over the world, and you want to just code like 20 hours a week? Or do you want to be here working in a group in the office where everybody's kind of like vibing on something, and we have intense sessions where we're just like cranking out work, and we work hard, we play hard, but like we're all together, like single voice. You're want to be at the company while the company scales and grows. And that's a different person that someone's looking for than someone that's contributing to the team, but like they're out. We don't need them on site. They're just kind of coming in as an individual contributor on some very specific projects for like 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week, whatever it is. So you gotta pick one of those lanes for your LinkedIn. And then on your resumes, you could potentially sort of like do a little free agency, figure out what works. All right. What else? Any other questions? These are some good ones. These are some deep questions today. I like it. Awesome. Any other questions? If not, we're going to end early. We're going to get to preparing for the turkey. Drink water, stretch our stomachs out. Be prepared to just go to town this week. I'm not seeing any other questions. Maybe the job seekers are on vacation. That is a question that some people ask. They ask, like, do you still get offers? Do you still get hired during the holiday season? Oh, yes. I've had lots of people reach out to us recently with projects, and they are desperately looking for people. So if you are looking for work, there are definitely employers looking to hire. But it's got to be a fit, right? So oftentimes people will be like, well, I'll take anything. It's not really a great idea. You really want to make sure it's a good fit. Any other questions? I'll wait like 30 seconds or so. And if we don't see any more questions, I will say goodbye to everybody. And we'll do this again next week. So if questions come in between and you feel like you're not going to remember till the next week, feel free to shoot me an email. It's Mike, M-I-K-E, at sdcs.io. So it's SDCS for San Diego Code School.io. More than happy to, if it's appropriate, read the question and then try and answer it. Okay, another question. Any recommendation for growing my network while meetups are still online? Yes. This is an awesome opportunity for you to meet with people that you ordinarily wouldn't be able to go to. Like, for example, a lot of the meetups when we're doing them in San Diego, so the San Diego JavaScript group, which I'm super involved with, we were doing like 8 in-person meetups per month. That was almost 2 every single week, which just within our organization. You know, we had the fundamentals, we had the monthly, we had the bring your own project, the women's bring your own project, the full stack, the React, the Vue. We had like everything in the sun that you can imagine, right? So it was hard because logistically that means you got to drive out to wherever the location is for that night. It's going to take a little while to, you know, get in, go through the talks, socialize afterwards, get out, drive home. And so now it's actually kind of cool because a lot of them are compressed to like 1 hour online experiences. Jump on in an hour. There's oftentimes networking opportunities. Great way for you to just sort of like interact and meet with a few people. So here's a couple of things that I think are helpful with that. One, you can start sampling communities outside of your local region, right? So now, like if you wanted to, if you're in California, you could go to like Brooklyn JS and go to the Brooklyn JS meetup, if they're still having, I don't know. So you can now start getting involved in communities and you can start sort of like sampling, well, what's it like in like the Austin tech startup community? What's it like in Washington? And like bounce around a little bit more. I think that's a huge advantage. The second is LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn is phenomenal. If you're not on LinkedIn and you're not leveraging LinkedIn to connect with folks, you are massively missing out. You need to jump on LinkedIn and really start, you know, interacting with people. So, you know, liking their posts, commenting on their posts, you know, really trying to consume content and just see like, okay, who are some folks that you want to sort of like follow and see what's going on. Twitter is super frantic. So I'm not a huge fan of Twitter. I think You got to be on it too often for you, too much of the time for you to really grow a following as an individual and grow like a brand on Twitter. It's like a ton of work. But on LinkedIn, it's pretty level. Everyone can contribute something. Everyone has something that they can sort of like get some eyeballs on and start building some momentum behind. So I think it's a great opportunity for you to, again, more easily identify people at companies, more easily engage with other developers. There are groups that you can join, lots of ways that you could basically be just like getting some FaceTime with people. And then, man, you got free Zoom out there, or you got Google Hangouts. You could, use a Calendly to get people to book little 15-minute, informational interviews, right? That could be a way that you sort of like, again, sort of start connecting with people and creating genuine connections where you really are trying to add value for them and figure out like, hey, is there somebody in my network I can introduce you to, versus like, how do I get a job at your company? Not a great way to begin the conversation. So I would go to more meetups, and I would more effectively leverage LinkedIn, because I can see you're on Twitter. So, or not Twitter, Twitch. So instead, my recommendations rather than Twitch would be to double down on LinkedIn. Make sure that you're really focusing on, can I create meaningful connections with people, like dialogue, conversations, like, hey, anything exciting you're working on in this last fourth quarter before the new year? What's it like going through a pandemic at a giant organization? What's changed, right? So simple stuff, right? Try not to make it a super complex interaction. Like, how do I get a job? It's complex. It's hard for people. Even if they wanted to help you, it's hard for them to answer. Any other questions? I feel like these are brilliant questions today. We've uncovered a bunch of talent. If not, I am going to end this early, which is okay. Not a bad thing. I don't know why, but I can drink so much of this LaCroix. I'm so glad it's limitless. Any other questions? All right. So if hearing none, I'm going to give one final pitch. Again, my email is mike@sdcs.io. If anybody's interested in more information about our apprenticeship program, then they can check out sdcs.io/FAQ. There's a video on there where we go through sort of like what it's all about and some frequently asked questions people usually have. And we will, I hope, be opening up another cohort real soon. I'm hoping in December, January, we'll be ready to open it up. So that said, peace out. Have a great holiday. I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving, and I will see you next Tuesday.